Hello and welcome to this interview with Tim Farron. We are really excited to have Tim with us today, and we're going to be talking a bit about faith and politics. And also a bit later on, we're going to be looking at some of the questions that you have sent in for Tim to ask. So Tim, welcome. It's lovely to have you with us this morning.
Charlie, thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
So Tim, just tell us briefly a bit about who you are, where you're from, and what your job is.
Right, well, I am Tim Farron. I'm a Member of Parliament for Westmorland and Lonsdale. It's a huge area. It's about the same size as the whole of Greater London. So I've been a Member of Parliament since 2005 here. My role, I think, is to serve the people of the community, to stand up for them, hear what they say, and try and make the case for better services and for all the things that we need in our community. I was born in Preston, down the road, and but I've been living up here for over 20 years now, and as I say, served as our MP for nearly 16.
You are also a Christian. Have you always been a Christian, and how did you come to faith?
So I think being a Christian is a thing that you're not automatically born into. I was not brought up in a Christian family. In fact, I don't think I thought myself an atheist, but I certainly didn't think myself a Christian. And I thought people who took religion too seriously were a bit weird. I had a friend of mine at sixth form who was the college Christian, bless him, a guy called Jack, a lovely guy. But we all thought, and I thought, he was odd. What he believed was not very attractive, and that it probably wasn't true.
For you, what was the moment where you thought, actually, this is something that I can believe in?
So first of all, I think if you believe in God, let's just have it as a thought experiment. You may or may not believe in God, but if you are prepared to just for a moment accept there might be a God, he's not going to be a half-baked low wattage God, is he? There's either no God or there is an awesome all-powerful God in charge of absolutely everything. The idea there's a part-time God that can create planets but somehow can't manage a virgin birth, don't be silly. There's either an awesome all-powerful God or there's not a God. So when you say, how did I come to this? I think it's important to remember if God's hands on everything, then me claiming credit for me becoming a Christian is not part of the story. It's entirely his doing and not mine. So I was 18 and, a very small background, as I say, loving family. My parents split up when I was about 5 and we lived with my mum. But my mum worked at that point, so I was 18, at what we now call the University of Central Lancashire, but we would then call Preston Polytechnic. And she came home one day, or I came home from sixth form, I can't remember which way around it was, and she came back to tell us that her and a big chunk of her department was being seconded to a college in Singapore. What? So that summer, after I'd finished my A-levels, off I went with my little sister and my mum and half a dozen other people from Preston Poly to Singapore. I was only going to stay for a month or two because I was going to come back, get my A-level results and presumably go off to university, which, thank the Lord, that is what happened. But to cut a very long story short, it's already long, sorry, is that we were put in a house that I think belonged to the college, and the previous tenants had been Christians, and they left behind a bit of their stuff, not a lot, but they'd left behind their books. And because I was going to be the first to leave, I got the sort of storeroom. It was fine. There wasn't a lot of junk in there, but it was mostly their books. Singapore, it's a tropical. It rains heavily when it rains. And I brought literally one book to read with me. It took me 2 days to read it. So, I ended up reading what was in this room. I started off with Winnie the Pooh because that's what there was. And it looked a lot less frightening than all the flipping scary God stuff. But in the end, I ended up reading some of the God stuff. I ended up reading stuff which today we'd call apologetics. It's really stuff about the evidences for Christianity in prophecy, in the things that were written in the Old Testament that came through true in Jesus, and which are unfakeable. I mean, I later find out, for instance, that Isaiah, in fact, like all the Old Testament, actually, we have copies carbon dated proving that they were written well before the New Testament times, which means you can't just have written them to make it look like Jesus fulfilled scripture. That's disproven, scientifically disproven. So it begins to put a tingle down your spine and you think, oh, flipping heck, it's true. And I think that's the thought that went into my mind, actually. Almost, I'm not in, almost like, not actually, almost like a voice speaking to me in my head. Oh, flip, it's true. And in the end, so did I have an emotional need to have God in my life? I'm going to argue we all did, but we all do. But I don't think I necessarily felt like that just then, or was consciously looking to become a Christian. I was just reluctantly struck by the realization that Christianity is actually true.
Thanks for sharing about your faith, but you're also a politician. When did you decide that you wanted to go into politics?
So that if I had a nice, neat testimony, I'd be able to say I became a Christian and then I realised I needed to do good in the world, and so I got involved in politics as a way of serving people. It wasn't like that. In fact, it was the other way around. So I joined the Liberals when I was 16 in my first week at sixth form college for all sorts of reasons. I was already a member of Shelter, the campaign for the homeless. I just believed in, I felt the Liberals were just reasonably radical. I think it's all right being idealistic, but if you believe in some wild sort of scientific political theory that involves human beings having to behave perfectly, you're going to be disappointed. So I just thought liberalism to me was an ideology, if you like, that's about improving people's lives, but doing so in a way which is just rational, understanding that we're not perfect, understanding there's no society that is perfect. So anyway, I joined the Liberals for all sorts of reasons, idealistic reasons, and I got involved in student politics and in local politics. You know, one of the most exciting things that ever happened to me was when I joined the Liberal students, and then I very quickly got put in into the company of a bunch of amazing little old ladies who ran my local Liberal branch. I was going to all these student union debates and trying to be cool, and then I was spending my weekends at jumble sales with grannies. And but what a wonderful balance, and trying to fit in my terrible band at the same time. But so I got involved in politics, and I went to university. I became a Christian that summer before I went to university, and at some point in that first year at university, I was at a Christian Union event of some kind, some social, kind of coffee morning or something. And there were a couple of guys who were twins, and one of them was called Adrian. And we had a chat, and he basically said to me in a friendly but challenging way, he said, "You're involved in politics and you're a Christian. Are you sure you should be involved in politics? It's a mucky business. It's a mucky business." And it's a phrase that's really struck me and stuck with me. And the answer to that, is politics a mucky business, is yes, it is. And so's everything else on planet Earth. And you can, if you're a Christian, go and be a hermit and hide away from the world. I'm absolutely certain the Bible does not encourage us to do that. Or you can go and do a bit of good as best you can in the world, and politics is a way of serving people and making people's lives better.
You said something really interesting there about actually being a Christian. You have this opportunity to do good in the world. So what would you say is one thing that you're particularly proud of in your political career?
So I guess it's all going to be the stuff that is local and personal. And it's so I think what those little old ladies taught me was this very much ethic of personal service, of community politics. So for me, that's what being a politician is about. It's about service. It certainly is where I've settled now and where I feel my role is now. So having been a party leader, but there is something quite joyful about doing something as I am now, where actually I have no ambition to lead or be a minister or anything like that. But I feel utterly fulfilled in what I do. So, for example, I met a father and his daughter a couple of years ago outside a post office somewhere in South Lakeland. I'll not say where. And this chap's wife, and indeed it was his daughter's mother, they basically were deeply distressed because the mother was not a UK national. They barely saw her. And she was living out in the Far East. This is a genuine marriage. There was a son by the marriage as well, who was a little bit older, who was living with the mother. And this little girl was very bouncy, pleased to see me, made the case. But the father was in pieces, really. And So anyway, look, we went to town and we got the immigration authorities to sit up and listen. It involved some really quite tough conversations where I had to be not very polite to officials, and very persistent. And you make yourself a nuisance, an absolute nuisance, with the authorities, where it's actually more bother for them to say no to you than it is to say yes. And then a year later, outside the same post office, I was talking to some lady about dog muck on pavements or something, and out of the corner of my eye I saw this little girl again, and then I saw her dad, and then I saw her mum, and then I saw her brother, and I knew that we fixed it, but that realization that you've managed to unite a family. So there's loads of those. I could spend all this interview reeling off examples of things like that, and that's the approach that I choose. That, you know, I watched a program called Kathy Come Home, and it's about this young woman who's homeless and she ends up losing her kids and on the street, and it's terrible. And the thing that I was upset by that when I watched it as a 14-year-old, when I watched it again in my 40s, it made me angry. The thing that I was angry about was how many people in authority could have helped her and didn't. And so the kind of the motto, if you like, the ethos of me and my team is that we will never drop anyone. We will never drop anyone. And if we're the last person fighting someone's corner, so be it.
You spoke about being leader of the party, leader of the Lib Dems then. How did you feel when that opportunity came about?
Look, I joined the party as a 16-year-old. I'd become a councillor in my 20s and, you know, a parliamentary candidate a few times. I then, against all the odds, win a seat in 2005. I become the party's president when we're in coalition government. And then I get to become leader. And it's a sense, you know, it's a bit like, you know, you think of a team that you supported all your life, Blackburn Rovers, and you end up becoming the number 9. You end up being the striker. And it felt like that. So, you know, a great achievement. And I also felt, you know, Liberal Democrats had been absolutely battered after the 2015 general election. I thought, you know, this is my opportunity to rebuild, and I feel like there's a real project ahead. And so, yeah, excited about what was to come next, and sort of proud that I'd achieved, let's be honest, an ambition that I'd either secretly or not so secretly harboured for quite a while.
Yeah. So what was it like to serve as leader, but also as a Christian?
So really challenging. I found almost from day one, in fact, absolutely definitely from day one, that people wanted to kind of pick stuff out of the Bible that clashed most with, you know, modern current thinking, and say, you think that, well, and you think that, and you think that, which just, you know, if I was a Christian bus driver, and I spent my time not, you know, giving people tickets and driving people to their destination and being generally helpful, but banging on about my faith all the time, then I'd probably rightly get sacked. You know, as a Christian, to be a faithful Christian does not mean that you take your eye off the ball of doing the job that you've been given. And I felt very frustrated that journalists wanted not to talk about the things that I was in my job to do, but to have a rather distorted attempt at, you know, trying to talk about what the Bible did or didn't say about certain things, particularly things about personal morality. And the thing is, there were ways of me dealing with that, where I could very easily have challenged back, and because in the nicest possible way, I knew more about the Bible than the people asking me about it. And I could have won the argument, so to speak, but I wouldn't have been doing my job. I'd have been like a bus driver talking about the gospel when I should have been driving the bus. And my job was to, you know, lead the Liberal Democrats and try and help us to recover, which we did a bit, to be fair. Only 3 Lib Dem leaders have ever increased our number of seats at a general election. I'm one of them. But the point I'm making, I think, is that it was so for me to tackle the questions I was asked would have meant me basically not doing my job as leader, because I'm there to talk about Brexit and farming and the National Health Service and what we think about these things, not to get stuck into an argument about what Leviticus means. So it's very, very frustrating. And, you know, I try to deal with it with grace. And to be honest, and it was tough.
You then took the decision to step down as party leader. Can you just tell us a bit about how you came to that decision?
So, I mean, I spent 2 years as leader of the party, having previously spent 4 years as president of the party. And I was a bit more, because Nick Clegg was the party leader at that time, people didn't seem to feel the need at that point to really drill into my faith. So I kind of had maybe I was lulled into a false sense of security whilst I was party president. And party president's the kind of internal party leader. And because we were in coalition government during that time, I had to be quite external as well, because our actual leader was, partly running the country. So I became leader, and I had 2 years, and they were a very, very, very full 2 years. The first thing you had to do is to pick up a party that had gone down from 56 seats to just 8. So we had a year of rebuilding. The referendum happened. Leave won, and I took a position that I did to say that we should carry on fighting to stay in the EU. So it was going not bad, actually. And then Theresa May called an early general election. And I'd had a lot of grief about my faith in those first days as leader back in July 2015. And then it all died away. I didn't get much stick for the following 2 years. The general election came along, and on day one, it all started again, and it wouldn't stop. And so, look, I tried to back those questions away and say, because as leader of the party, you've got about 2 minutes worth of TV time a day. And if they're focusing upon, your take on the Bible, rather than my take on Brexit, because that was the party's offer, I'm not doing my job properly. There was 600 Lib Dem candidates out there, and needed me to make a case for them, not to be getting stuck in the weeds arguing about what the Bible says about things. So it's the most weird thing. And absolutely 100% not of my choosing. But the journalists take you where the journalists take you. And so at some point, I took the view, again, about 2 weeks into the election, that I could not carry on as leader. And I'll come to why in a minute, I took the view that my job was to, whatever mistakes I'd made in answering the questions that I'd been thrown, my job was to save the party, because we were making a good recovery and this general election had come at absolutely the wrong time. So I thought my job is to save the party, lead us through this next few weeks, make the right decisions, work my socks off, try and hold my own seat, which was absolutely dicey. And then I will, over the summer, step down. And the reason I was going to step down is because I made this choice that if I was going to get constantly plagued with questions about my faith, then I had kind of two choices. One was to kind of just go along with a worldly view and say, I don't really believe what the Bible says, effectively deny my faith and crash my faith just for convenience. And then I might be able to go on and be a decent leader and speak about Lib Dem things. Or I'd have to be honest and maintain my integrity and decide that, following Jesus is more important. And if I stayed leader, that would mean not giving the easy answers that the public maybe wanted me to give, in which case I'd be a terrible leader. So either terrible Christian or, car crashed Christian, or terrible leader. What a choice. So I thought the third option is this: I'll step down. And so I have the freedom. And I think, so it was a tough decision, but and the biggest decision I've made probably politically, bigger than deciding to stand, because that felt natural. And lots of people wanted me to do it. But I absolutely think it was there. I feel totally at peace having done it. And it is no great sacrifice. Oh, somebody once said, and Charlie, you're going to tell me who it was, that he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. And so there's throughout history, there are people, evidence of examples of Christians who gave up something very, very dear to them, but was only ever temporary. Your career's temporary, your relationships are temporary. Dare I say it, your life on this earth is temporary, but a relationship with Jesus Christ literally lasts forever. And my faith is not cultural, it is actual. It's in a real living God. And to choose to serve him is a privilege, and there's people who've made far bigger sacrifices, far bigger sacrifices than me, because in many ways my life is easier and nicer now that I'm not leader. Okay, so it was a sacrifice, but it also also not. And I can, you know, and I love being our MP here, so it helps me to do that job better, perhaps. But I think it does give me a little bit of authority, shall I say, because the reality is that following Jesus involves sacrifice. And it involves giving up stuff. And there's some things the Bible, you know, that we're asked not to do, having chosen to follow Jesus, that I'm not tempted to do. So what right have I got to speak about them in one sense? But I was very, very tempted to be leader of the Liberal Democrats. In fact, I was. But it's not that being a Liberal Democrat or a Liberal Democrat leader is inconsistent with being a Christian. But at that point, I was in a position where I either denied Jesus, was a terrible leader, or I decided to give up the leadership to serve Christ. And I made the right choice.
How important is it for you to have faith and continue to serve here in Cumbria?
Yes, I mean, whatever happens to me next, I don't know. But I mean, since I stepped down, we had that incredibly traumatic and chaotic Parliament that lasted for 2.5 years, and then we had the general election. And the Liberal Democrats, I managed to get us up from 8 seats to 12 in the 2017 election. It looked like we were going to do terribly well, and then we really didn't. Went down to 11, and it was a really, I'm going to say this, it was almost miraculous that we won here, and I won here in December 2019, and it's because of heroic effort by lots and lots of people on the ground here. So I absolutely love doing it. I don't know what the future holds, but if it was up to me, I'll carry on being MP for a little while yet. I think the opportunity to serve people, the fact that I'm able to speak and say the things that I think, hopefully graciously, and knowing that I try not to sound too full of myself here, knowing that I'm not sackable by anybody, because I'm only sackable by the people of Westmorland, so that. Yeah, so it's a really great privilege, and I thoroughly enjoy doing it. The worst thing about the pandemic is that I am a people person. I love being amongst people. I like people. I think they're funny. I think they're wonderful. I think they're challenging, and I think they're made in the image of God, and therefore they are absolutely deserving of utter, complete dignity and love, even if they're being flipping difficult. On the upside, never has there been a time in our community is more needed serving, and it's a privilege to do it.
So what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick fire round of the students' questions. First one is, have you ever had a religious experience or an encounter with God?
Have I ever sort of physically seen him or heard his voice? No. Have I felt his presence, been utterly moved by his grace? Oh, yes.
And how does your faith affect your stance on political matters?
So I'm somebody who believes that as a Christian politician, I am not there to legislate to make people who are not Christians behave as though they were. So I'm not there to kind of take, the law of Moses and or indeed anything that Jesus says in the New Testament and make it law. But I think it absolutely does affect my approach. It means that I have to and should see every other single person as worthy of respect and dignity and love. And also means that my conduct, I think, is regulated from on high, and that I should behave in a gracious and kind way to people, even if they don't behave like that to me. And I should, I should speak. My language should be seasoned with grace, and remember in all things that I am, I am a sinner. I am flawed, and so I will screw up. And the wonderful thing is my salvation does not depend on my performance. It depends on his. Depended on mine, I'd be absolutely stuffed. It depends on his. But as he cried from the cross, it is finished. Job done. No, nothing for me to add to it.
Really interesting question. Obviously, you've mentioned there about decisions that you have to make as a politician. Do you pray about specific political situations, and does God answer?
God answers every single question, every single prayer, sometimes with a no or a wait and a not now, but often with a direct yes. So the answer to your question is, I don't pray enough about these things. I should pray more about them. Sometimes in a snatched moment at the beginning of the day, I will look at my diary on my phone and I'll pray through what's ahead. And certainly difficult decisions I will pray about. But I think the honest answer is that I should pray about these things more than I do.
A really interesting question, because I think for me as a young person, I would have struggled to answer this as well. But how are people able to challenge and question government?
So, I mean, we have a democracy, and it's a kind of indirect democracy in the sense that you elect a member of parliament and they go and, challenge the government or not, as the case may be. And I think that, which is why, to me, my relationship with my constituents is so important. And so in a sense, here in Westmorland and Lonsdale, I'm your means to do that. And so, for example, I have a youth forum, which is, we're having another one next week or the week after next, where we get young people from around the district to come along. We look at 2 or 3 issues, and then we just open things up in a sort of formalised way. But the reality is that any single time you've got a question you want ministers to answer or you want government to answer, ask me and I'll ask it.
Why is it so difficult to make decisions?
Right. I mean, some decisions are easy and straightforward, so it was easy for me to decide that I was going to get behind that family and support them through the immigration process. The Home Office might have said on the other side that it was difficult because there have to be rules when it comes to immigration, and then we can't, go be inflexible for everybody. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any control over who comes in and out of the country. So I guess there are lots of different issues, and you've got to weigh them up. And one of the problems we have, I think, in politics and in the media is people think it's simple. And amongst the things I've learned in my time as an MP is that there's 2 sides to every story. Now, there's probably a right one and a wrong one, but it's more likely to be a grey area. And so we should always be a little bit sympathetic towards, tolerant of somebody who thinks something quite different to us, and not just assume that their motives are as dark and terrible as they might be depicted.
And my last question for you is, why did you become a politician and not an evangelist?
Well, who's to say I can only have to do one thing? I got involved in politics. I joined the Liberals when I was 16. Even as an idealistic 16-year-old, I realised that being a Liberal joining the Liberals was not a fast track to a career in politics. So if you'd asked me at the age of, 18 or 19, did I want to be an MP? I'd have said yes. If you'd asked me, did I expect to be an MP? I'd have said absolutely not. I'd have been reasonably content not to be, because, that's life. There's loads of stuff I'm not good at, but I guess I talk, and that's what I've done for a living, sort of, for years. Try to do as much listening as I do talking. And my grandma used to say, Tim, you've got 2 ears and 1 gob. You should use them in those proportions. I'm not sure I do. But if you're a Christian, you are told that it's right to share your faith. Because if you have, by the grace of God, a relationship with Jesus Christ, which you know is going to last forever, and you have ultimate meaning and eternal life, which seems so crazy to talk about today, but I think the evidence 100% stacks up that it's true. It's really selfish to only want it for yourself and not to share it with others, and really difficult to share it with others because you feel silly. And in one sense, I'm somebody who might find it hard to share my faith one-to-one, but because of what I've been doing in my life the last couple of decades, not that hard to share it 1 to 1,000 when I'm, standing up somewhere. So maybe I don't have to make a choice. Maybe I can be both.
Fantastic. And lastly, I'd just like to thank you, Tim, for your time today. And I'm going to leave the last words to you. Tim, what would you like to say to students who are studying at home at the moment?
Hang on in there. Well, it's a difficult time. I'm a dad of 3 teenagers who are here now, and, finding some positives from this time. I think they've enjoyed it to a degree, and they've found it massively frustrating and limiting in other ways. And, as a family, we've lost people to coronavirus, and I know many of you watching will have too. And it's so a time of great tragedy as well as great limitations. Throughout this, and given we're talking about Christianity, you forgive me if I finish on this theme, throughout this pandemic, we've rightly been encouraged, and I would encourage you to follow the science, to make sure we act rationally, not to believe any old fake news that's out there, but to make sure you keep yourself safe and others safe, and be patient, because we will get through this. I'm a Christian because I believe it's rational. And I know that's an unpopular, unusual viewpoint, and it always has been, by the way. Genuine Christianity is always countercultural, always. But I just want to encourage you just to spend a moment or two, if you get the time, just to consider this for yourself. The Bible isn't confusing. It's actually really quite straightforward if you know where to look. It was written, so in the New Testament, written by people who were eyewitnesses to the life of Jesus Christ. And it was written with a very express purpose. John says, these were written so that you might believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you might have life in his name. So it's very clear why they wrote it. So it's either a hoax or it's true. It's not a bunch of fables. It's not a bunch of philosophy. It's not an interesting and jumbled up account of things that happened and then got lost in the mist of time. It's a deliberate attempt to make you believe that the meaning of life rests on the life, death, and resurrection of one man, the only man in the history of humankind who claimed to be God and was taken seriously. And so I just want to encourage you to not dismiss it. And don't dismiss it because it's difficult. Because if there really is a God, let's go back to this idea, there's a big, awesome, almighty God. You know, if he agrees with everything you already think and endorses everything you already believe in and never challenges you, you've made him up. He's not real. The real God, who is perfect and me and you aren't, would challenge you, contradict you, and disturb you. And so he does. And that's kind of proof that he's real. So, you know, read Mark's Gospel. I say that just because it's short and it'll take you an hour to do, and see what you make of Jesus. Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Tim. And we wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers, Charlie. God bless.